Well, in last month's midterms, Democrats in Wisconsin and Michigan won back their states' governorships for the first time in 8 years. And in response, Republicans in both states are trying to take power away from them. In Wisconsin, a bill is on its way to the outgoing governor's desk that would increase the power of the Republican-controlled legislature. It would also limit early voting to just 2 weeks before Election Day. Early voting is typically credited with helping Democrats win. Another bill would make it harder for the incoming Democratic leadership to pull the state out of a lawsuit to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Next door in Michigan, the Republican-controlled legislature passed a bill making it harder for incoming Governor Gretchen Whitmer to adopt regulations stricter than the ones that the federal government has in place. They also gutted initiatives to raise the minimum wage and to increase paid sick leave, even though that's what Michigan residents had voted for. According to a new article in Politico, those moves may actually be backfiring on Republicans. Daniel Strauss covers campaigns for Politico. He joins me now to talk a little bit more about his reporting. So, Daniel, how have activists in Michigan and Wisconsin responded to these Republican efforts to try and weaken Democratic power?
I mean, it definitely hasn't worked out the way Republicans had hoped. These are two states with very active sleeping giants in activist communities of Democrats, and they have been activated at a time when usually they're in a sort of hibernation mode. It's right after an election. Democrats just elected governors in both states, but there are protests, there are organizing groups that are usually involved in fighting against major Republican legislation or trying to resist moves by major Republican lawmakers in both states are out in force.
There's a quote in your story. This one comes from a DNC member from Michigan, and he had this to say: "I think the Democrats were energized in November, and now they're going crazy." What are grassroots groups trying to do to channel that excitement and that energy?
I mean, right now they're working to call attention to these bills. They're basically camping out at the state capitals in both states. They're organizing protesters and protests throughout, and the more organized groups are looking at lawsuits and what they can do in anticipation that the either outgoing Republican governors sign these bills into law.
So how are the Democrats that are coming into these offices in Michigan and Wisconsin, how are they reacting to this, move to try and limit their powers?
I mean, look, they are being pretty clear about this. They are saying that essentially there are Democratic governors coming in quickly, and they want to consolidate power or at least hinder the ability of these new governors. They're being pretty clear about this. There's no, we are trying to improve democracy. There's no sort of zigzagging about this. They are being upfront about what they're doing.
So, it's interesting, the breakdown here. How were Democrats able to really capture these statewide offices in both Michigan and Wisconsin, but Republicans, they've still managed to control the legislature in both states?
Yeah, and this highlights a larger problem that Democrats are having to deal with. They haven't been able to remedy the fact that in most states, most states that they've targeted aggressively, Republicans control the state legislatures, and that is a big factor and a big problem for Democratic policy agendas. Here in Wisconsin, the governor-elect, Tony Evers, just barely beat outgoing Republican Governor Scott Walker. In Michigan, it's a little more clean for Democrats. Gretchen Whitmer won handily, but even then, she wasn't able to carry over a number of candidates to control the state legislature.
Daniel Strauss of Politico. Daniel, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.